You're listening to the HR Mixtape, a podcast for leaders who want to understand people, strengthen culture, and navigate change with clarity. Today's conversation starts now.
Joining me today is Meghan Grace, consultant at the Institute for Generational Research and Education. Meghan helps leaders understand generational dynamics at work without relying on stereotypes. Meghan, thank you for jumping on the podcast with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you study generations, and for those that have listened to this podcast for a little while, they'll know that I am a huge proponent of Gen Z. I absolutely love them. I think they're doing so many amazing things for our workforce. But I'd love to hear kind of what was your aha moment that made you want to really kind of bust down these workplace stereotypes when it comes to generations?
Yeah, I was very early on in my career, maybe like my first or second year and my first big kid job. And I'm a millennial proudly. But we were talked a lot about when we were coming into the workplace of just like we were ruining everything. And I was like, that's not really fair. No one really asked us. So we had the opportunity to do a study on Gen Z when they were really kind of like just coming into college. Like I think they were really the oldest, the second year in college at that point. So we call like the early first wave of Gen Z because we were just noticing as we were doing our jobs as millennials and my research partners Gen X, they were asking really different questions. And we were in education at the time. And, you know, when the people you're supposed to be serving are asking you very different questions, you're like, something interesting is happening here. And so, both from our perspective of like, we come from a leadership background and an education background of like, teams operate better when everyone understands each other. And so, that was really it. We wanted to understand the students we were serving and eventually who would become coworkers and team members and professional staff members. And so, it really started when they were coming into college, was when we started to get into can we approach generational understanding from a little bit more of a collaborative approach to help teams and help people do a better job in connecting.
I love that. You know, as you've done this work and you've dived into that research, what do you think people are getting wrong most about Gen Z at work right now?
There's a few things, and I think I don't know if they're getting it wrong per se, as much as they're not going one step lower that I need, like go deeper in the analysis of why we're upset about something, right? So one thing that I come across a lot is managers and supervisors will be like, "God, these Gen Zers, they just question everything. Just go do your job." And I really try to say, well, let's get to the root cause of like why they might be asking that question. Maybe your process directions are not that clear, or maybe they're genuinely curious about that policy or the way that something's done because there could be something that we're missing that we haven't looked at, and they're in many ways a fresh set of eyes for our workplace. And then sometimes they really just need the information and they want to ask for that. And so I'm never a fan of teaching by dissonance and question marks. If someone has a question, like help them navigate that so they feel more empowered to do it down the road, not just like hit them over the head and say, figure it out. Like trial and error is sometimes a healthy pedagogy, but most of the time it just creates frustration for the learner. And then I think the other thing that people are getting wrong with Gen Z is that you hear this with every new generation is that nobody wants to work and everybody's lazy. They said it about millennials. I'm pretty sure they said it about Gen X. I know they said it about baby boomers. It's just like it's old and retired. I think why it's settling really difficult with some friends today is that Gen Z is really loud about not wanting to work for people that they just don't agree with. So whether that's philosophically, ethically, emotionally, from a well-being perspective, politically, like they're not willing to give someone that they disagree with the time of day because they don't think it's worth it to sacrifice certain things for a job. So they're really willing to divest their time and their energy away from things that are not aligned with what they think is important. And so you'll hear kids these days don't want to work. And I really try to say like, no, they don't want to work for you maybe. They're actually very hardworking and they're very driven and they're very future focused. But if you're not creating work environments and teams that are conducive to the fact that they're going to look at things and behave differently, then no, they might not want to work with you because you're not creating an environment that says you're welcome here. We want you to be here.
You brought up the creating teams and environments differently, and I want to dive into that a little bit because one of the things that I've seen is, kind of our definitions that we're using of things like business etiquette, things like how you ask questions, things like this is the way it's done. I've started to encourage leaders to take a step back and go, okay, this younger generation, though, they are the future of work, right? So they are going to be pushing us to evolve and change. How have you helped leaders see that? Because there are times where I'll be in a meeting and I'll feel like this external cringe for the way a Gen Zer might approach something, but then I remind myself that like that's my view of what I think is normal, and they're gonna help define what that new normal is for, catchphrasey there, but what do you think about that?
I think we do this unintentionally, but humans oftentimes design things, whether that's our homes, our work environments, our teams, the way we interact with others, based on our own preferences. We are creatures of comfort, despite even some people being very like open to change. We are creatures of comfort, so we're going to design for things that feel comfortable to us, and that's where like the whole concept of bias comes in. But when we design thinking everything is kind of like about our processes and perspectives, we get protective of it and we get comfortable in it. And then when someone new comes in and says, hey, why is this happening this way? Or I wouldn't do it this way, we take it personally. We get really personal about it. That's just the way we've always done it. Instead of saying, we have done it that way for a really long time. That's a great point. I haven't sat and thought about why we do it that way or if there's another way to do that. Thank you for bringing that up. And those are two different energies for the same response from a Gen Zer who really, to the point that they get to college and to their first like full-time jobs, have only interacted with their peers. So it's their first time interacting in multi-generational spaces where the entire environment isn't designed about them. School and youth development, everything up to college, and even college is pretty designed for them and their peers. Until they get to the workplace, it's really the first time that they've had to interact and say, this isn't designed with me in mind. So they're asking a question because it feels different. And then we're receiving that question as older generations. And sometimes we take it as an attack. And really it's them wanting more information about why something is the way that it is. Because they didn't get the rule book or the book of norms or etiquette that our generation did. And that's okay. But I think really collaborative, well structured teams and well functioning teams are willing to say, oh, I'm not taking this personally. This is a great question. Let me explain why. Or let's talk about where we might be able to evolve some stuff because we haven't refreshed that in a little while.
As HR thinks about how they can create programs that are more inclusive across the board for generations, things like designing communication, development opportunities, potential policies that are going to support multi-generational workforce. How do they start to push themselves, or what questions have you asked them to push themselves with to have them start thinking about that design piece? Because I think that's so important that you brought that up. As we continue to evolve in our craft as HR practitioners, this is something we're going to have to figure out, is taking it that different lens when we're creating things.
Yeah. So designing across the board or designing across let's just say the generation spectrum of oldest to youngest, we have to factor in there's some just universal things that regardless of age or life stage or generation, you're going to care about. So humans innately, like what we found in our studies, like we like to work because making money is nice because it makes our lives more comfortable. So we want to make money. So any decision, communication, process change, sometimes like the underlying conversation is like, is this going to impact me financially? And that's a completely fair question. We also, as humans, we want to work because we like having a sense of purpose and using our skills. The part of our brain that says, ooh, yay, good, is when we achieve things and when we feel productive. And so using our skills makes humans feel good, feels a sense of purpose, like we're something bigger than that. So from a development standpoint, a communication standpoint, hitting on those things is going to be really critical to saying like, let's keep you engaged. And then what we look for in a work environment, regardless of generation, we find that trust is one of the top things they're looking for. So most people want to operate in a trusting environment. Like I trust you, you trust me, right? We're pack animals. We all got to go together. Communication, because that is just the transmitting of information, and we need information to do our jobs and to work and to operate effectively with others. And then we want to feel healthy and safe at work. So we don't want to be put in dangerous way, and unless some jobs are more dangerous than others, but those attract a different type of person. But for the most part, we want to know that in a trusting and communicative space, it's also a healthy and safe environment. So if we're focusing on those 6 things, usually we're like covering the bases for everyone. But then we start to see that generations communicate differently. So, how they're building trust through communication is different. How they go about their work, how they collaborate with others, how they build relationships. That's where the stickiness comes from, is that generations gather and take in information, they disseminate information, they approach information, they approach relationships and etiquette and norms in different ways. And then we don't talk about it. So, we all develop that with our little peer groups. And then we all come together and be like, why are you doing it so differently than we are? And then we get into fights about it in the workplace. And so I think sometimes it's a matter for HR professionals, people really focusing on the people at work. Is first the recognition is that your four different generations in the workplace are coming to the workplace with a different set of communication etiquette rules, a different set of human interaction and relationship building rules. In some cases, it feels like they're navigating two to four different types of economy and how they're making financial choices, because the financial experiences of baby boomers are definitely not the same of Gen Zers today when they were the same age. And so this idea of we have to really recognize that people are at different life stages. And because of that, they're coming into work with a different set of priorities to some degree and a different set of how they're going to interact with people. So the comfort level of different platforms. Generally, we see technology and communication adaptability being a little bit more adoption friendly and fluid with younger generations. And so they might welcome a new platform in with open arms. Older generations might say, like, why do we need to do that? It's been working. And so when we're thinking about developmental experiences, it's thinking about how different generations take in information, how they receive information, how they communicate that information, and then how they're going to interact and engage with other people in that. And that probably is a whole other 25-minute conversation.
Probably. Well, and it made me think about, as we design programs now, we're already taking the lens of different types of adult learning styles, right? If we are more strategic about it and layer in, career level and generation, I think we
Mhm.
can have a more holistic view of, where we need to touch base on things. I want to talk about culture a little bit because you started off by kind of defining how Gen Z picks the locations that they're going to work for. And it's different than how other generations or how we've seen other generations typically approach work, which leads to this concept around, marketing what your culture is like in a much different way. So,
Mhm.
how do we lean into that so that we can take that perspective when we're talking about culture, whether it's we're doing it externally, we're marketing it, or whether it's you come in the door and we want to teach you about our culture.
Yeah, so I think it's we can say, we value these things till the end of time, right? So like we value trust and we value transparency and all of those things. Where Gen Z is going to challenge us on that is following through on that promise. And then they're going to call you out when you don't do it. We have to remember, like, this is the generation that's like, I have the receipts. This is what you said you were going to do. You did not do it. And they get a little bit of that because they were raised by Gen X, and Gen X is very, in a similar way, kind of direct and very like it's black and white. And it's not fully black and white for Gen Z, but they might say, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. How are you going to do it better next time? And so they're going to push leaders, especially those responsible for setting and leading culture, to back it up. So when you say we value our employees' health and well being, Gen Z might say, okay, well, you're going to give me health insurance, but what else are you doing to say that you care about that? And so they're gonna wanna see some of those examples. They might wanna kinda test some stuff out. They might want a little bit more proof before they're completely signing on.
One of the things that I have really liked about the approach and what you've said so far is this idea around listening and collaborating as we create these things. So, how best can we listen to our younger employees without, making it a Gen Z thing, right? Like, well, we're only going to listen to Gen Z. Going back to what you said about, when millennials were coming into the workforce, I agree. You could not go to an HR conference that did not have 5 to 10 sessions on the millennial generation. We don't have the same thing for Gen Z, which I think we kind of learned our lesson to not overflex, so dramatically. But I still want to make sure that we're listening in a way that hits that collaboration you talked about.
Yeah, I think one of the things is sometimes we feel like we have to listen to, like, solve a problem. when sometimes we just actually need to start with listening to get to know that person or to get that to know that group of people. And so I really do recommend like starting check-ins, starting meetings, starting gatherings, even just with some casual opportunity to connect about like things that are not just work, because that takes down the tension of being at work. It's also sometimes I feel like leaders, let's just say leaders who might be a little bit further removed from your newer hires or entry level hires, want to make it like a Gen Z thing or like, I'm going to go talk to the interns when in reality, like in that in itself is like this weird power dynamic situation of I actually just want to know our team. I wanna know who's a part of this team and have those good connections, and that's, I think, a completely different way to approach that, and so making it an everyday thing, not just a, like, once a quarter, you will hang out with the boss, because that puts this weird pedestal mindset, and, like, Gen Z, for the most part, has had very, I would say, flat relationships with authority, so I'm not saying they see their parents as peers, but they've been involved in a lot more adult conversations in their families and their upbringings, and so they're kind of used to the ability to talk to someone older than them and not be weird about it and feel like their voice actually matters because that was just they were raised that way. And not in an entitled sense, but in a way of I have a voice, I'm young, I still have value in what I say. And so I think sometimes telling leaders to go back to the basics of like, are you actually actively listening and you're not just listening to like solve a problem or check a box or do a compliance thing. And then I think that the thing that scores extra bonus points is when a Gen Zer raises a concern and you're like, I'm going to see what I can do about that, closing the loop on actually seeing what you can do about it and saying, like, hey, I actually did try this thing, or I asked this person, I got a no, and here's why. I appreciate you telling me. But closing the loop and saying, I tried is something that really matters to them, not just getting lip service of like, thank you so much for your complaint. That's never going to see the light of day.
Yeah, for sure. I think this generation is pushing us to do it, but I think that's one of those things that every person actually really likes that. That's just like
Mhm.
a good practice that you can put in place. As you've thought about this collaboration across generations, what are some practices that you think really improves the speed to collaboration in a team so that, as these different groups are coming in, that they're not ending up in these stereotyped buckets, right? That you have some practices in place that really build that cohesion quickly.
I think something that's helpful is teaching everyone how to mentor and reverse mentor and not necessarily in a formal program, but the idea of like how to be a mentor leader and to use practices of mentorship without it being like a formal program allows everyone to operate in like multi-generational teams in this mindset of I have something to give someone else and I also am humble enough to know I have something to learn from somebody else, and that's where it helps. I'm not saying like make everyone even, but make it an equitable approach to the ways that people can approach these things. Because older generations will say, yeah, the young people at work have taught me this, this, and this, and that's so helpful. Younger employees might say, I feel like I'm too young to speak up and teach something. And so going into it and saying, like, we're going to learn all how to be mentor leaders, even if you're not formally mentoring someone, it just takes this team approach of I can contribute. I can also take something from this. I'm not too big for my britches to do that. So I think that is one is teaching people how to mentor and then reverse mentor is a really big one that I think is necessary. And then also just having really intentional conversations around energy, interest, strengths, and like leaning and leading into those conversations of like, just because you're the young person doesn't mean that you have to operate the Google Doc, right? Or
I
like,
think you need to say that again.
yeah, just because the youngest person in the room does not need to be making the slide deck. Um, and sometimes we default to that of like young people do technology and older people just say words and that the young people write them down. Like to some degree, that does need to occur. But in some cases, that's not playing to strengths and it is playing to stereotypes. You could hand that off to some young person who has terrible color coordination and has no idea how to do formatting. And then you're just mad and you're like kids these days. So I think it's going into projects and saying, here's what needs to happen as an overall. Here's how this team what this team needs to achieve. Now let's figure out who are actually the best players for each of these positions, not this like weird hierarchy of age game.
I love that. You have given us so many good nuggets in this conversation. So I'll ask this is our closing question. What's one thing that you want leaders listening to this episode today to try in their next team meeting to help bridge this collaboration?
So, am I allowed to say a bad word?
I mean, you can.
Okay. All right. So I've said this before, but I think it's really necessary to start meetings with like 5 minutes of shoot the shit time. Like it's just you go shoot the shit. Like it's not just like, well, it's your weekend, right? Like, and if it's not the beginning, it's always having the 5 minute buffer of talking about a thing that's a human connection point. Like it seems you can't plan for it, but you need to plan for it. You can't force it through an icebreaker, but you need the time to be humans and talk about the things that light us up. So, example today, I met with my content assistant, Callie. She's amazing. I love working with her. But we got on the topic of like hairdressers and nail people and like your beauty team, your care team. Like they know all your secrets. But we needed to talk about that. And like that was our 5 minutes of kind of shoot the shit time. And now she knows that I am like loyal to the end of my days to my nail salon. Like it's a big thing for me. And I know that she doesn't like to get her nails done. So maybe I will take her, maybe I won't next time she's in town kind of thing. And so, but it's these human connection points that you have to build in the 5 minutes. And you can't be like, okay, shoot the shit time's over. 5 minutes is over. There's natural cadences where you're like, okay, now back to the fun. Like now we got to get back. Like, but people want to have fun at work. They want to feel connected at work and they want to feel like they can trust people. And the one way we can figure that out is if we actually act like humans at work. And sometimes we have to talk about not work. And so I think it's if you can sacrifice 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you have a large team. It's not planned, but it's a thing. It's a thing that's necessary. A good example, I have some business partners, like we have to talk about what we all got in our monthly clothing rental order each month. We have a text thread just about it because those are things that connect us. And so we're always going to sit in corners of different generational cohorts unless we actually make the time to say, oh, here's some things that are actually like that we share. So it is. You got to shoot the shit for like 5 minutes.
I love it. Such good advice, such practical takeaways from our conversation. So, Meghan, thanks for the work you do, and thanks for sitting down and chatting with me about this.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thanks for tuning in to the HR Mixtape. Like, share, review, and subscribe to support the show and help more people discover these conversations. Until next time, keep the conversation going.